Now, come on, you got to love how short that last video that you had to watch was. You got to love that. I hope you do anyway. Okay, I'm going to pick it up now with the laws. And again, memorization is required here. You must recognize the acronym for these laws, and you need to know what these laws accomplish. Here we go. All right, the first law that you must memorize is called the RCRA, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. Now, when you see resource, it doesn't, the name of this thing does not clue you into the fact that it's hazardous waste that we're talking about. So you're just going to have to memorize it. Here's what the RCRA does. It's a law that was passed by Congress to require the people that create the hazardous waste to keep track of it. And here's the phrase for you to memorize. From cradle to grave. From the time that chemical is created until the time it is disposed of properly in a hazardous landfill or deep well injection or any of those other things that we covered in the last video, until it is put to bed, the company that makes the chemical must have an accounting of where it is, how much of it, etc. And the reason that they passed this law had something to do with Love Canal. Because when they finally discovered that these people were having all sorts of medical conditions, they started working backwards to figure out, okay, who's responsible for the chemicals there? Well, Hooker Chemical had gone out of business long ago, so you couldn't go after them. Even though they're the ones that actually put the chemicals there, they were unavailable to be sued or anything like that. Local inhabitants blamed the school district. After all, they built a school right on top. They sued the state of New York. Everybody was suing everybody, and the whole idea here was somebody's got to be accountable, not just for the damage that was done, but the big thing was for the cleanup. All right, so now if you're a business and you make, just pick something out of here, belts. I'm always using belts. The tanning process uses awful, nasty chemicals. If you're going to purchase those chemicals from a chemical company, it's the chemical company that has to keep track of that chemical. Since they made it, they sell it to you, and then you need to report back to the chemical company and tell them, all right, you sold me 50 gallons of this stuff. I used up 40 of it in my process. I have 10 gallons of waste, hazardous waste left, and now I'm destroying it with a plasma torch. Well, the original chemical company has to be involved in all of those aspects of things. This put a big accountability responsibility on the chemical companies. And you can imagine, they fought this law big time. They said, my gosh, what if the company that makes the belts never reports anything to us? How can you hold us accountable? And Congress said, somebody's got to be held accountable. It's going to be the company that made the chemical in the first place. So that's the RCRA, cradle to grave responsibility for the hazardous material. The second law that you must memorize is called the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. It's called CERCLA. It's also known as the Superfund Act. Memorize it. You must know this. CERCLA is called the Superfund Act. And this law was created in direct response to Love Canal. It is what Lois Gibbs actually accomplished. Here's how that works. Because of Love Canal, nobody could find anybody accountable who was liable for the poisoning and the killing of people. How are they going to get compensated? Congress said, this is ridiculous. We're going to set aside a big pot of money so that every time we discover a hazardous waste dump, we have the money to clean it up ourselves. Oh, we're going to go after the company when we figure out who's responsible for it, and we'll sue them, and we'll try to get money back into the Superfund. But that's what the Superfund is. It's a congressional pot of money set aside to clean up hazardous waste dumps. Well, once Congress initiated this law and put money into the Superfund, all of a sudden we're discovering hazardous waste dumps all over the U.S. We have one right here in Jacksonville. These things are called Superfund sites because they're on the list. The problem is the list got so long and the Superfund pot of money wasn't big enough that now there's like a waiting list for the cleaning up of these chemicals, which is exactly not what the law intended. The law intended whenever we find a Superfund site, we'll get in there and clean it up right away, because these hazardous wastes will end up in the groundwater if it's not there already. It'll end up polluting the air, soil. People will end up getting sick and dying. So the purpose of CERCLA was to create the Superfund so that we could clean up hazardous waste sites all over the United States. All right, the last thing on this slide that I wanted to talk about is this idea of brownfields, and they're defined in your textbook on page 454. A brownfield is a contaminated industrial or commercial site that may require environmental cleanup before it can be redeveloped or expanded. Old factories, industrial areas, waterfronts, dry cleaners, gas stations can all are all common examples of brownfield sites. And the problem, of course, with brownfield site is nobody wants to work there, nobody wants to live there, but they've got to be cleaned up. This is land that will end up being very cheap down the road. And these areas, they're called brown because grass won't grow, are supposed to get cleaned up. The Brownfields program was started to help clean up a park or turn something into a park. Try to make something good out of a chemically damaged situation. And that's what a brownfield is. You need to know it. This shows you where in the U.S. we have Superfund sites. Look at Florida. We have 52. You might wonder why we have so many. It shouldn't surprise you that California is a big state, so it's going to have a lot. Remember the Northeast United States I was telling you about, this Rust Belt area here? Look at the numbers here. 90, 92, 34 is not so bad, 69 in Michigan, and then 116 in New Jersey. New Jersey's always the butt of the jokes. New Jersey is just New York's dump, and there's a lot of bad chemical Superfund sites in the U.S. The reason that Florida has so many, it's an interesting story, but back in the 20s and 30s and 40s, and when we really started creating hazardous waste in the 50s, before there were rules and regulations, if a state wanted to get rid of its nasty stuff, one of the things they do is, let's send it to a state where there's not a lot of people. Florida did not have a lot of people in those days. Remember, it's before air conditioning. So they would load it on trains, and the trains would come all the way down, and they'd take it down as far as the train track would lead. And then when the train track ended, because they didn't used to get all the way down here, they would offload the hazardous waste, find a piece of land, and dump it there. So that's why Florida has so many. And like I said, I think there are 2 actually in Jacksonville. Superfund sites. These are identified. This is government coming in saying, yes, we have a big problem here. It's got to be cleaned up, and we will use the Superfund to save the day. Okay, here's that definition of brownfield: contaminated industrial or commercial site, may require environmental cleanup. And there are some examples. All right, you remember integrated coastal management? Do you remember integrated pest management? Here's another integrated management system, integrated waste management. And the idea here is a new enlightened approach. Forget about the old techniques. Let's think of new enlightened ways. And it might have to do with purchasing services instead of things. That service flow economy you talked about the other day. Reusing chemicals. One company may be ready to dump its hazardous waste that might be available. Somebody else might be able to use it. But it's a use of all of these different techniques. Reducing, recycling it, all of these different techniques that have been mentioned previously. And it's the use of something called life cycle analysis. What that means is we analyze the product that's being made, we analyze the chemical that's being used, and we try to find any time along its life cycle a way that we could either turn it into a safer product or we can reduce it altogether, recycle it. It's called life cycle analysis. Basically, it's that cradle to grave idea. IWM, Integrated Waste Management. All right, so you got a couple laws that you needed to memorize. This diagram here kind of shows you how it works. It's a holistic approach. It means at every step of the process of the life of that hazardous waste, we analyze it. We analyze the whole thing. Holistic approach. Manufacturing. We can change package design. We can change manufacturing processes. Or we can try just using less of the stuff. And of course, in this IWM, we're not just talking about hazardous waste. It's any waste. We might be able to recycle it or compost it. But this is an enlightened, holistic approach to cleaning up big messes. This picture is also in the book. And I just wanted to comment on the fact that if you want to really be environmentally sound person, environmentally friendly, one of the things you need to be considering as you buy a house and build a house and purchase the things that you need to purchase to run your life, think about buying things that are recycled. Everything in this picture is from recycled material. It might be the paper that's in the books. Yes, you can buy from certain publishers that only use recycled paper. This carpet is completely recycled. This wood is certified grown. Certified sustainably grown. Remember that term that we used? Right? This chair is made from recycled products. You get the idea. Everything here can be some sort of, this metal was once used for something totally different. It was reformed, repurposed, and so now it is the base for a lamp. When you consider purchasing things, you should consider companies that are using recycled material to make products that you might want to buy. Okay, that's the end of chapter 16. Gotta love it. And I think that's going to be it for exam number 5. So that'll be 14, 15, and 16. And that exam will be on Thursday, March 21st. I will see you in class.